Jerry. So you've got the Scouts sort of up and running, but everybody wants to know about Selous Scout selections. Just tell us a bit about the selection and how the guys were picked. It's of great interest to people.
Well, honestly, it was quite interesting that, and it was very difficult for us, and especially for Ron, to be able to go to the RAR, because that they were really our prime recruiting objective, because the RAR soldiers were ideal to be trained as terrorists because they were the right color. All that sort of stuff. SAS also were very reticent to let us go and talk to the SAS blokes, because they obviously didn't want to lose any of their men going to the Selous Scouts. So Ron wasn't very popular, and I can understand old Brown Robinson, who was the boss, not wanting him to go and talk to the SAS guys to come and join us. So it was very difficult initially to recruit anybody. Selous Scouts, what are you guys going to be doing? And we couldn't tell them. We're a tracking unit, and we need trackers. And the RER were very reticent to let us go down and talk to their men, because why? Because we the RER have got our own trackers. But we're saying we're setting up a tracking team for the army. But the territorials can do tracking for the army. Us RER blokes, we've got our own blokes who can do tracking. And it became very difficult. And we couldn't tell anybody really what was the background to it all.
Yeah.
But eventually, Walls sent out a signal to the CO of the RAR and the SAS and everybody, and said, well, this new unit is being formed, and I would like you to give Major Reed Daly all the help you can in providing men to join the unit. And that sort of eased the pain a little bit for Ron, who was the chief recruiter, if that's the right thing. Anyway, the very first recruits started to come in, and obviously we were based in this mine, I told you, in Bandura, and it had the basic utensils, but we had to have some sort of selection. So Ron said to me, Jerry, I want you to set up a selection course and for the first incumbents and see how it goes.
Yeah.
So the tracking school at Kariba were already now attached to us. They were the first outsiders, apart from Bruce Antonovich, myself, and Ron. Officially, then, the tracking wing at Kariba became the first new members of the new unit, Selous Scouts. And their task was to be the instructors on the very first tracking course. So I was sent up to have a chat with Ant White and get the thing really get going. So I had just, when I was at school at Plumtree, one of the things I did was outward bound. And that was one of the best courses I ever done in my life. And to this day, it remains like that. So I used a lot of what I went on the outward bound school. I used in this course, a selection course for the Selous Scouts.
Okay.
And Ant White was also very good in setting up also the obstacle courses and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But anyway, we went out to Kariba, to Waffa Waffa, and we set up this course, selection course.
Right.
And it was about a month. And it was, I will tell you, it was very, very tough. They walked, endurance was covered, a lot of training on bush warfare, how to survive in the bush with minimum rations and all that sort of stuff. I won't go into all that because I'm sure most of the guys know all about that. But it was quite intensive. So that was the first selections that took place. Then, of course, we now had to deploy them into the field. It had never been done before. apart from old Mac McGuinness and Andre Robbie on a very small scale, which we spoke about earlier. So the whole thing was new. It's very difficult to describe it. How could we put these pseudo teams into the op area, knowing that they were going to be safe? And I don't know who it was. It might have been Ron or Mac McGuinness or somebody designed these things where we called them frozen areas. And the whole op area, it started with the hurricane area, was split up into areas, and the intelligence guys, intelligence room in the Selous Scouts, Alan Littner, he designed these areas like down a river line and a road and along a road and up a range of mountains, and the maps were photostated and sent to all the jocks, and the jocks then had to put these areas onto their operational maps in their ops rooms and number them identically. So the frozen area 16, 17, and 18 in the Selous Scout ops room would be the same areas in the Mount Darwin ops room. And we would then freeze, we'd send a signal out saying areas 16, 17, 18, and 20 are frozen with effect from 0700 on whatever date.
Which means no other troops were allowed into that area.
No other troops were allowed into that frozen area.
Yeah.
So, and then we would send we would deploy the blokes. But before the deployment, also, people think it was just you put a group of guys into a frozen area and they had to go and find the terrorists. Well, it wasn't as simple as that. The SB blokes had to, the first thing was you had to have a captured terror. Where does your group come from? We were trained in China, wherever it was in China. So they'd interrogate him nicely because he was going to become a turned terrorist and go in with the group. So, rather than beat him around, they gave him cigarettes and nice food and all that stuff. And they obtained all the intelligence from him. So the group that was being briefed, they had an in-depth briefing by the SB guys. You blokes have been trained in this camp in Russia. You were taken to Tanganyika, then you were flown to Beijing, and you were taken here and there and that, and now you came back again you were dropped into Lusaka, and you were dropped off on the road just outside, or you went into Mozambique, and from Mozambique you came in via blah blah blah, and that's where you are in that frozen area. And who were the instructors in Russia or in China? That the thing. How did you get into the country? Which crawls have you been through to get to where you are in the Candea or whatever TTL it was they were operating? So it was when I say a briefing, it was like a whole day and questions for them. When did you go to China? How did you get there? What airplane was it? Blah and blah. And that the group that was going in were subjected to a day very intense briefing. People don't realize it. I mean, me, Jerry Strong, I would have forgotten whatever I was told at the beginning. But at the end of the day, I would have been say it all again,
Yeah.
So they had intense briefing.
Right.
Now came deployment, and this is where it starts getting a bit here. So here we have a gang. You can imagine of, let's say, 14 or 15 soldiers who are now terrorists for all intents and purposes. They've got the kit, they've got the weapons, they've got everything. They've had a full briefing. Allegedly they've been trained in China and come through and blah, blah, blah. So they put in the back of the vehicle and off they go now to be deployed. And I'll just give you, I used to go on many of the night deployments with old Pat Miller was the driver. Now, first of all, the areas are frozen. That meant no security forces were allowed into those frozen areas. If there were security forces in that area previously, they had to move out. And so we used to wait a day to make sure any security forces, including internal affairs, the BSA police, army, the whole lot. No security forces there at all. Then, in the middle, at about 1:30 in the morning, Jerry Strong and Pat Miller, or whoever it was, the driver and an escort, in the back were 16 gooks, but the Selous Scout gooks. And off we went into driving at night now, just in the truck, down through in the dirt road, mine and all that stuff. And we'd go very slowly, and the blokes had rehearsed all this. They would, at a given signal, they'd be dropped off, and they'd jump off the back and do a sort of parachute roll, and the vehicle wouldn't stop. We'd carry on with things. And then they would gather, and they'd walk for most of the rest of the night to a pre-arranged place where they'd taken on a map and base up. And the drop-off vehicle would then carry on with the driver and one bloke through the TTL, no other escort or anything. I'll tell you, I don't want to be basic, but it was nerve-wracking if you and you're going in the middle of the night and through a known area where there were tours, because that's why the scouts would drop there, to find out exactly where these tours were. And then you went back to base camp and you got
Jerry,
back in the morning.
Jerry, would that group then go and get friendly with a particular kraal?
Exactly so. They would have a whole cover story already worked out by SB. They would come in, they'd say to the local people, we are the new group, we're on our way passing through. We've heard there's another group here. Have you seen them? And they'd have a whole story brief given to them by SB, what they had to say. And they would say, we come from this place and that place. And did you those vehicles, they heard some bangs the other night? We did the mining and blah, 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 blah. And we want to meet, we know there's another group here. We'd like to meet them. Can you organize a meeting? Go and tell them we're here, blah, blah, blah. And so a meeting would be set up. Now, this is where the scouts were incredible. And I'm talking about the operators. There was some instances on a few occasions where a meeting would be organized. The crawl head, and they had their own, it's difficult to explain. The security forces, we had our own intelligence. You had aeroplanes taking air recce's and OPs sitting on gomos looking, out for tours and all that stuff. So we had our own thing. But the locals had their own, the terrorists had their own intelligence gathering. All the Majibas, the little pickaninnies, they were told, you see first of all, you look after the cattle. Make sure when we walk down this path, you send the cattle after us to obliterate any of our sport.
Yeah.
And if you see any of the soldiers, you come and tell us. You are our eyes and ears. So, and we operate at night, and the security forces at night, they're useless. They won't operate. So we operate at night, and then in the morning, we'll hand over during the day, the security forces can operate. But you make sure you've obliterated the tracks and don't. The only time you come is to give us water or food or whatever it is. So there was almost a handover takeover. The night operation was the tours, and the day operation was the security force. That's how it sort of operated. So the scouts now at night time, and they would organize these Majibas to organize a meeting. Sometimes it was a meeting at night, and now it became tricky because the guys would the Selous Scout blokes dressed obviously affairs, equipment, and everything. They would go in, but the Morungus, the European element with a radio and that would just hang up five just on the outskirts of the crawl, and they would the guys, the pseudo guys, RAR blokes, plus the captured guy would go in and meet the crawl head, and he would say, "Okay, the real tours are just here. I'll bring them in," and they would come in, and they would have a meeting in the crawl, and eventually, if all went well, they'd start singing Chimaranga songs and blah blah blah, and eventually the Selous Scout guy would say, you know, these bloody weapons they're getting in the way. Let's make a pile and put them over here. You know, I'll send one of my blokes to guard them. So leave it, and then we can all dance and sing it. So they'd leave all the weapons on the side. I'm giving just an example.
Yeah.
They'd leave the weapons on, you know, at the edge of the crawl, and a Selous Scout guy would be designated to go and look after them. Meanwhile, he's dressed as a, and they'd have a big dance and singing. And the European guys would be in the bushes watching all this bloody. And sometimes, and on a couple of occasions, the game was up. You know, the sentry would sort of nod, and he knew he had all the tour weapons now there, as well as the Selous Scout bloke. And through the bushes came the European element, armed now with their weapons, and saying, right, stick them up, guys, this is a holder. And the tours would, the Selous Scout guys would then rush and grab their weapons from the pile. They'd be allowed to do that because the guy guarding the weapons was a Selous Scout. And it was, stick them up, guys, the game's up, you know. And the real tours would, apparently their eyes just got whiter and whiter, and you know, they're like goldfish, they couldn't talk, they were so surprised.
Yeah.
And on a few occasions, a whole group would be captured and taken off and turned by the SB and reintroduced as part of another Selous Scout call sign.
Yeah.
So it was, and on other occasions that didn't work. So the Selous Scout terrorists would say to the real ones, okay, we'll see you tomorrow round about lunchtime. Maybe we come, where are you based? Oh, we live by this gomo over here. There's some trees there, that's where our camp is. Okay, well, we'll come and see you tomorrow. And the Selous Scout blokes would withdraw. Then they'd get on the radio and they would call up the Selous Scout base, let's say at Mount Darwin Fort. And the Selous Scout ops room, you know, when you were running the ops room, you'd hear this voice. Hello, headquarters or whatever it was. This is call sign 6-3. Do you read? What? Yes. Okay. We've got a group of 16 tours, and we're meeting them for lunch at whatever time. Get the fire force on standby. Yeah, then you'd phone the fire force thing, get the fire force on standby. And then the Selous Scout guys would now be on a little gomo somewhere, overlooking the RV place, and they knew what information was required, direction of the wind, so that the best attack direction was into the wind, so that the noise didn't carry, you know, low level behind a bloody gomo or whatever to hide the noise. And so they gave the attack direction, and all that was fed through to the Selous Scouts ops room, who then passed it to the KCAR, who then was given the call sign and the channel frequency to talk directly to the Selous Scout. And then the fire force would come in, do the necessary, bong, 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 and hopefully it was a successful thing. And blah, blah. And then the Selous Scout call sign would be withdrawn the next day, or we would go in at night a couple of days later and give them a make-believe story and some blood and some old bandages and they would have a story. Now this bloke who gave the game away and called in the fire force, and called in the army. Some of you people here are traitors, you know. And look here, this bloke's been wounded and blah 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 at the contact. Where are the other terrorists in the area? Are there any more? We need help. Then they get more information, and they go, and the same story would happen all over again. It was a fascinating period of the war. It really was. And those guys who acted as terrorists, I'll tell you, the Selous Scout guys, they were brilliant.
Jerry, the Scouts also were very effective on OPs, because I think they were better than the European guys, because they could pick up the nuances in the villages and stuff that we didn't, that passed us by.
Yeah, absolutely. The OP work was extraordinary. They really were brilliant. And not only that, but they were also briefed beforehand, what is it, what information does the K car need? They need what way is the wind blowing?
Yeah.
Where's a good attack direction? If they want to drop the paras, is there an LZ somewhere about? There were certain factors, that information that had to be given back, as well as how many gooks there were and all that sort of stuff. So not only did they have, and they had to know a full briefing where they'd been trained in Russia or in China or whatever, or Tanganyika or whatever. And they were, it was an incredible period of my life.
Jerry, were you still with the Scouts when they pulled off the Nidzonia attack?
No, I was with the Scouts for the first 2 years, 2.5 years of their existence.
So you'd probably
the only attacks I did were internal. I never went on any externals with them. Yeah, so
Jerry,
that was it.
Just changing the subject slightly. I know there was a contact you were involved in on your wife Dee's farm in Manicaland.
Yeah, I'm very glad you raised that, because I think I came to the period now with the Selous Scouts. For me, I've been there 2.5 years. It was up and running. We, the cover story was we were a tracking unit, and a lot of territorial guys had gone to the tracking unit at Nkomo and been trained, and the camp for the terrorist, the pseudo operations had been set up, and we'd been deployed. The forts had been established on Mount Darwin and Bajura and Namtali, and so things were going okay. And Ron went to, was called by General Walls, or went to see him. So Ron said to me, "No, I'm not moving, Jerry." And General Walls has seen me and wants to know whether you shouldn't be deployed because you've got a good career ahead of you, etc., etc., etc. And I think you should move because the army needs you and you're a good guy. So I then reluctantly, although I must admit, it was getting to a stage now where the Selous Scout was now becoming, it was becoming as big as a living RLI, 500, 600, 700 soldiers there. And it wasn't a small, intimate unit that I joined. So eventually I said to Ron, "Thank you. I think the time has come where we must part." And he gave me a very nice farewell, and I left and joined the RLI. Went back to my old commander, 3 commander.
Yeah.
Now, one of the, what a team it was. There were the blokes. Kim McDonald was the 2IC, Mark Adams, John Cronin, Rod Smith, and Jug Thornton with the subbies, or CSM Fraser and Johnny Norman. They were fantastic blokes. And, we had a 5 force deployments left, right, and center. I had an incredible advantage in as much that any Selous Scout call-up, I knew how the Selous Scouts operated. And so that was an advantage for me, and because I could talk to the call sign involved directly. And blah, blah, blah. But one particular incident comes to mind, and I'll come to your question now. My wife, Dee, her family had a farm just outside Inyazura. And it was a dairy farm, and fantastic. They won, best dairy herd in the country many occasions at the Salisbury show, and it really was top class. And Dee's eldest brother ran the farm because the old man was getting on a bit like everybody does. So Joe was running it, and when he went to do the milking, on his way back from the milking one day, some tours had found out where he lived, and they ambushed him on his motorbike, and he got shot through the backside while he was sitting on his thing, and they chased him into his house, and he and his wife had to manned the windows and fired back and repelled the attack. It was touch and go. It was quite an awful scene. So as a result, Brigadier Davidson knew and he knew my attachment with them and that sort of thing. He was very good, and he deployed the Selous Scouts into the Marconi TTL to try and find out where this group was that had attacked. And after about 5 or 6 days, they located the group. And I was at Grand Reef at the time as a fireforce. So the siren went, and I ran to the ops room, and I was given a briefing, and I looked at the map, and there it was. I could see it was on the Folk Farm. It was where we were called up. So we get in the fireforce, and off we go. Anyway, I was talked onto the target area by the Selous Scout call sign, and sure enough, there was a group of 7 or 8 of the Durs. So the contact started, and we killed immediately about 4 or 5, and 2 of them jumped into a cave. Well, it was a hole in the ground, but it was sort of like an L shape. You jumped in, and then you snivelled into the cave, the bottom part of the L, if you understand what I'm getting at. Now, the advantage for those 2 terrorists that were in this cave is that they looked up into the sky, and they could, in the hole that they jumped through. So if any RLI stick, the 3 commander bloke, put his head over to start shooting at them, they could see his silhouette, but he couldn't see them. So they would obviously let a whole lot of fire, a burst of machine gun fire or whatever, and he obviously had to duck back again. And so it became quite difficult. And eventually they called for tear gas, because in those days we wanted captures, because the Selous Scouts needed the captures to turn them so they could find out more and more where the terrorists were, blah, blah, blah. So the guys never carried tear gas. So I had to get on the radio back to 3 Brigade headquarters in Umtali for them to get hold of the police who had the tear gas and send the tear gas to a helicopter that collected it and back out to the contact area, as well as a box of tear gas masks. And the plan was that the troops would throw the tear gas into this hole, and when the 2 terrorists had been almost suffocated from the tear gas, they would put on the masks, the troops would, then look down the hole and either shoot them or tell them to come out or whatever, but all would be well. So the first thing was, a helicopter came with the tear gas grenades, and that was dropped to the troops on the ground. That was the first thing. In the K car was Jerry Strong, and I've forgotten who the pilot was, Baldwin or someone. We went and collected the box that had all the tear gas masks in it. So we hovering around and around and flying around and around this hole in the ground, this big cave hole. The tear gas has been given to all the troops. So I had the box now with all these tear gas masks. And if I tried a million times, I'd never be able to do it. I can tell you now. But I chucked it out down to the troops, and it went straight down the hole in the ground to where the terrorists were. So they had the mask, and we had the gas grenades. I mean, what a shambles! I promise you, I could never do that again if I practiced a million times. But anyway, to cut a long story short, they managed to get them out, and eventually all was well. But I had a wonderful time in my time with the RLA.
Jerry, just tell me again, what was the procedure with a capture once he was handed over to the Scouts?
Yeah. As soon as there was a capture, the plan was a helicopter would come and collect him, the captured guy, and fly him directly to the Selous Scout fort. And the Selous Scout forts were designed out of corrugated iron, with a helicopter pad in the middle. So the chopper would land, and the capture would be left there, and the chopper would push off. And inside the Selous Scout fort were always some SB blokes. And they would take the capture over. They would interrogate him nicely, never beat him around, and offer him a food and a cigarette. And they would turn him until such time as he started to talk and tell everything and everything and everything. And when they thought it was time, they would hand this capture over to us, the Selous Scout blokes, and we would bring them in and say, right, you're now part of the group. Here's a weapon for you. And we would give him an AK. But unbeknown to him, the firing pin would be removed. So it cocked and did everything you'd think, but if you pulled the trigger, it just went click. The firing pin didn't work, but he wasn't to know that. So he now, on deployment, here he was now a Selous Scout. Yeah, and he thought it was a bit of a joke. And off they went again. He was given his weapon. We didn't give him any grenades or anything. And we gave him as many magazines as he wanted, full of ammunition. But the firing mechanism wouldn't work because the firing pin had been taken off. So he couldn't actually engage at all. Until such time as after the very first contact, then we would show him what had happened if it was successful. And they must have thought it was a big joke. They've been tricked. We put the firing pin back in again, and he was now a real Selous Scout, and he got paid. He was given a bonsela every time there was a good contact, and guys were captured and killed. And he became a Selous Scout. Now, what happened to those blokes after the war is another, another issue.
Yeah. Jerry, I think most of them were actually treated quite well by the new government, funny enough, from what I hear. There were a few exceptions, but on the whole, the new lot were pretty good about the whole integration process, and I don't think there was too much recrimination from what I gather.
That's what I've heard as well. Yeah, exactly the same.
But Jerry, thanks, man. Thanks for
okay, no problem. All right, Hannes.